In 16th century Europe, where kings strutted in gleaming armor and beards that seemed to shout, "Power!" there was one who, according to rumors, preferred the rustle of silk and lace over the weight of steel. We're talking about Henry III of France, a monarch whose life seems straight out of a historical telenovela script, with a touch of mystery that still has historians scratching their heads. Did he really dress as a woman in secret? Was he an eccentric ahead of his time, or simply a victim of the court's gossip machine? Let's unravel this story with the seriousness it deserves, but without losing sight of the fact that Henry III's life is a blend of tragedy, politics, and a wardrobe that, apparently, caused more stir than his governing decisions. To understand Henry III, we need to place ourselves in the context of late Renaissance France, a place where politics was a chess game with swords, and religion was the gasoline fueling every fire. Born in 1551 as Alexander Edouard de Valois, Henry was the third son of Henry II and Catherine de Medicis, a couple who not only ruled France but also raised a brood that seemed destined to star in epic dramas. France at the time was embroiled in the wars of religion, a brutal clash between Catholics and Protestant Huguenots that made family gatherings tenser than a lute string. Henry, who wasn't initially destined to be king, became a central figure in this chaos, and his reign, 1574 to 1589, was marked by conflicts, intrigues, and, yes, rumors about his personal habits that didn't exactly help calm the waters. Henry wasn't the typical burly king who chopped wood with one hand while signing treaties with the other. He was slender, elegant, with a taste for fashion that made him look more like a Renaissance runway model than a warrior. His mother, Catherine, a woman who ran the court like it was a reality show, shaped him from a young age to be a cultured and refined gentleman. Henry loved the arts, music, poetry, and, according to some, throwing parties that made Versailles soirees look like tea gatherings. But here's where the rumors begin. It was said that at these parties, Henry didn't just act as host but sometimes appeared dressed in women's clothing, complete with jewelry, makeup, and the whole package. Was this true, or just a smear campaign to undermine his image in an era when a king's masculinity was measured by his ability to wield a sword? Not a fan? The rumors about Henry III and his supposed cross-dressing didn't come out of nowhere. In the French court, where every move was scrutinized like an episode of Big Brother, any unusual behavior was a magnet for gossip. Henry had a close group of friends, the so-called mignons, young nobles who shared his love for fashion, luxury, and a lifestyle we might today describe as extra. These mignons weren't just drinking buddies. They were his confidants, advisors, and, according to his critics, proof that Henry was more interested in aesthetics than in governing. The pamphlets of the time, which were like the Twitter of the 16th century, were filled with caricatures and verses depicting him in dresses, earrings, and an air of frivolity that clashed with the image of a strong, virile king. Now, before we get carried away imagining Henry parading in heels through the Louvre, let's put things in perspective. Renaissance men's fashion wasn't exactly what we'd consider alpha male today. Noblemen wore tight stockings, padded doublets, lace collars that looked like giant napkins, and sometimes even makeup to highlight their aristocratic pallor. Henry, with his taste for the extravagant, simply took this style to the extreme. Historical records mention that in certain masquerades, parties where nobles dressed up and performed in theatrical roles, Henry participated enthusiastically, sometimes taking on female roles. This wasn't unusual for the time. Masquerades were a space where social norms were relaxed, and men could dress as women for the performance without raising eyebrows. But Henry, it seems, enjoyed these performances so much that the rumors began to spiral out of control. One of the most cited events to support these stories happened during a grand court party, where Henry allegedly appeared dressed as an Amazon, in a silk gown, jewelry, and a wig. Witnesses of the time, who weren't exactly impartial, described the scene with a mix of awe and mockery. But let's pause here. In the 16th century, masquerades and costumes were a way to display power, creativity, and control over the court's narrative. Henry dressing as a woman didn't necessarily mean he had a secret identity. It could have been simply a way to impress, entertain, or even provoke. However, in a France divided by religion and politics, any unconventional gesture became a weapon for his enemies. And enemies he had plenty of. Henry III reigned at a time when France was on the brink of collapse. The Catholics, led by the powerful Guise family and the Catholic League, wanted to keep the country loyal to the Vatican. The Huguenots, meanwhile, fought for their right to practice their faith without ending up at the stake. Henry, caught in the middle, tried to play the political tightrope, but his efforts to negotiate peace made him seem weak in the eyes of both sides. His mignons, his love for luxury, and the rumors about his personal life didn't help. The Catholic League's pamphlets, which were like the era's most venomous memes, accused him of everything, from being too effeminate to suggesting that his religious devotion, because yes, Henry was very Catholic, was just a facade to hide his sins. In this context, the rumors about his feminine attire were just another tool to delegitimize him. But how true were these rumors? Modern historians have debated this for centuries, and the truth, as always, is more complicated than a simple yes or no. On one hand, there's evidence that Henry participated in events where costumes were part of the game, and some reliable sources, like the diaries of Pierre de l'Estoile, a chronicler of the time, mention episodes where the king appeared in attire that challenged gender norms. On the other hand, many of these stories come from hostile sources, like the Catholic League's pamphlets, which had every interest in portraying Henry as a weak and decadent ruler. There's no definitive proof, like a portrait of Henry posing in a dress or a letter confessing his love for lace, but we can't dismiss the possibility that, in the context of Masquerades and his eccentric personality, he played with fashion in a way that today we might see as transgressive. We also need to consider the role of sexuality in these rumors. In 16th century Europe, the idea of a king who didn't fit the mold of traditional masculinity was a major scandal. The rumors about Henry didn't just focus on his clothing, but also on his relationships with the mignons. It was speculated that these friendships were more than platonic, an accusation that, in that era, was as serious as any political betrayal. However, there's no solid evidence that Henry had homosexual relationships, and modern historians tend to view these accusations as part of the same smear campaign that exaggerated his clothing habits. In a world where power depended on perception, any behavior that deviated from the norm was an easy target. Henry III wasn't just a king with a controversial wardrobe, he was also a man trapped in an impossible historical moment. His reign was marked by tough decisions, like trying to negotiate peace between Catholics and Huguenots, which made him unpopular with extremists on both sides. His policy of religious tolerance, though visionary, was seen as weakness, and his inability to produce a direct heir, his marriage to Louise of Lorraine was happy but childless, only fueled criticism. In 1588, the situation spiraled out of control when Henry ordered the assassination of Henry de Guise, leader of the Catholic League, in a desperate attempt to regain control. Far from strengthening him, this act made him an even bigger target, and in 1589, a fanatical monk named Jacques Clement assassinated him, ending his reign and the Valois dynasty. So, what should we make of the rumors about Henry III and his dresses? There's likely some truth to the stories, but not in the sensationalist way his enemies wanted to sell. Henry was a man who loved art, fashion, and spectacle, and in a context where costumes were part of court culture, it's not far-fetched to imagine him participating in masquerades in feminine attire. But these episodes, which today might be interpreted as an expression of identity or creativity, were used in his time as political weapons to question his authority. The truth about Henry III isn't that he was a king who secretly dressed as a woman, but that he was a complex ruler, trapped in a world unready for his vision or his style. Henry III's life is a reminder that history isn't always what it seems. The rumors, gossip, and pamphlets of the time painted a frivolous and weak king, but behind the feathers and lace was a man who tried, in his own way, to navigate a country on the brink of collapse. His love for fashion and spectacle didn't make him less of a king, but more human, in an era when humanity wasn't always welcome on the throne. So, the next time you hear about Henry III and his supposed dresses, remember, the truth is more interesting than the gossip, and a king with style will always be more memorable than one with a sword.